Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Manage Clients with Office 365 and SharePoint. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him almost 20 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Before joining Harmony in 2011, Richard worked for Dassault Systems PLM for over 10 years. Richard also has a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Automotive Engineering from Loughborough University. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this month's session. So we're going to focus on what we've termed either case management or kind of client management. I think there's a bit of crossover between the two, and there's many different examples of the kind of scenario where you are interacting with clients, or it could be even like with suppliers or whatever, and there's lots of email kind of communication going backwards and forwards, lots of documentation being exchanged, and some kind of typical examples of where case management is really required is kind of like in a law firm, for example, where lawyers and the caseworkers are managing legal matters. They could have many matters on the go at any one time, but there's a lot of information and documentation that is relating to a particular matter. It could be in the insurance industry for risk assessment and to handle claims and issue policies and all those kind of things. But also with the likes of financial services and kind of tax advice. I mean, we've got some great examples of customers like Ernst & Young, who are using Harmony and SharePoint together to manage their tax documentation for about 40,000 users worldwide. So a very nice example of where case management is required. So what are the main challenges that people see when they're looking at managing those kind of cases? As I mentioned, there's generally lots of communication going backwards and forwards. Obviously, there may be telephone calls and things like that, but a lot of it these days is done by email. Email is typically deemed a legal document when it's being sent backwards and forwards. It might have also encrypted data with that email or those kind of things, and there needs to be traceability of who said what to who, when, why, what advice was given, what approval was given. I mean, even in the case of working with a solicitor when you're purchasing a house, there's a lot of documentation that goes backwards and forwards, and paperwork that needs signing off and going over and analysing and approving. So there's many iterations of those documents as well. It's very rare that you get an initial version of a document that doesn't need redlining, doesn't need comments adding to or feedback from particular multiple parties, and that could be multiple internal colleagues, or it could be lots of external parties as well. But I think, for anything to be successful, the end user has to have a single system that they really live and breathe in. And that's what lots of people are very used to using. rather than having to switch between lots of different systems to get their job done. And also, any particular kind of case manager or caseworker could be managing or working on quite a number of different cases at any point in time. So they need to be able to distinguish between them, but have quick access to each case that they're working on. So with that, we'd just like to ask a quick poll question, please.
So if you could please answer the question on your screen, how do you currently manage cases? Are you using SharePoint? Are you using public folders and shared drives, a different off-the-shelf document management solution, a custom in-house solution, or you're actually looking for a solution right now? And we'll give you a minute to answer. Thank you. Let me show you what people have said, Richard, so you can see the audience today.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you everyone for responding. So we can see just over half are already using SharePoint. Quite a few people are looking for a solution, or they're using things like public folders and shared drives today. So thank you for that. So obviously, you've just, as you just said, most people on the session today are using SharePoint, but is SharePoint the best solution? Let's take a step back and see whether it meets the kind of general requirements. I think, generally SharePoint it can be quite difficult for new users who have come from maybe other systems that they've used in previous jobs or in previous departments where they kind of, as I say, really spend all their time in. So it could be like a bespoke system, and quite a few people said that they were using like an off-the-shelf document management system historically. So I think, when somebody comes from, let's say, a very focused case management or matter management solution in a bespoke system, and they try to use SharePoint for that on its own, it can be quite challenging, where SharePoint doesn't really have a tight integration into Outlook, because, as I say, the majority of the actual content that you need to capture and the communication is done by email. So it's really, really important to have a tight email integration. And as I say, it's often quite different to the end user. It's something new, something quite unfamiliar to start using. So it can be quite challenging. So I think definitely SharePoint is the right platform because it's one single platform which is intended for collaboration. And if you're using Office 365, for example, you've probably already got availability of SharePoint, and maybe you're using SharePoint for your intranet and other areas of the business. So it's a perfect platform. It's just that UI is something that is something that needs some assistance, some help, really. Because, as I say, it's the only single platform where you can manage emails and documentation together and have common metadata across them. You can use things like document sets to actually keep all the communication and documentation together in one place. And you've got one place to search for everything. So it's a lot easier to actually find the information that you're capturing. And at the end of the day, that's why you're actually capturing it, so that you can find it further down the line and work collaboratively. So absolutely, SharePoint is the right solution. It's the best solution, with Harmony integrating to Outlook and SharePoint together and bringing a very fluid and natural user interface, as we can see in my Outlook. So, for example, here, if I just minimize this for a second, we can see that I've actually got access to, in this case, a case that I'm working on. I can easily navigate around my SharePoint environment, my libraries, my sites, and I can drill down into the relevant areas that I need to work on. So it might be, as I say, that I'm working on a number of different cases, and I want to be able to get to the content nice and easily from a single interface. So we'll look at that in more detail as we go through the webinar. So how can SharePoint actually be used to manage documents and communication? Because there's a number of different ways, different approaches to actually architect the SharePoint solution that you put in place. You could be using folders in SharePoint libraries. You can create different sites, libraries, or folders per case or per matter, depending on different requirements that you might have for different types of metadata, different types of permission, different types of mechanisms that you've enabled there as well, and how you actually present those to the end user. Very common, I think, around case management and matter management is the use of document sets. It's a nice combination between, for example, using metadata, but also using folders to contain things together. Because obviously you can have the metadata applied to a document set, and then everything that you put in that set can inherit certain properties of how you've got it configured. So the great news is that Harmony supports all those different approaches of organizing your content in SharePoint, and we can actually see some different examples of that. So as we can see here, I've actually created a few different document sets. You can see that obviously I can actually get the properties of the set. I can update the metadata of the set, for example, directly from here. I can create them from this interface as well. But it might be that in a different environment, you actually want to use folders, or you may be using metadata and views to actually display and filter content in different ways. So with that, we'd just like to ask you another poll question, please.
So if you are using SharePoint, how are you organizing your documents today? Are you using document sets, as Richard just showed, or folders, metadata-driven views, libraries, or you aren't yet using SharePoint to organize your documents? And I believe you can choose all that apply. Thank you. Very interesting. Let me show you the results, Richard. A second so everyone can see.
Thank you. Yeah, it is interesting. I think I'm not actually surprised, to be honest. I think a lot of people end up using folders to organize their content in SharePoint libraries. Obviously, it's not necessarily the best approach to be using folders, but I understand why people do it, particularly if they've come from a more folder-based kind of way of organizing their content, maybe on a file share or some other system. So as I say, document sets is quite a nice kind of folder plus, if you like, to give you extra capabilities above and beyond what folders can offer. But there are also various ways to organize your content using metadata as well. And we'll take a look at some of those. So going back to our user interface, as I say, we could be using folders, we could be using document sets, and we could also be using views to actually filter various content in a number of different ways. So if I just go to, let's say, a slightly different location for a second, where I've actually got some document libraries that are being organized by metadata. you can see the views are actually being grouped by various properties, and I can move between different views as well. So that's a nice alternative to using folders, and I just thought it was worthwhile to kind of illustrate that. So let's just go back to where we were working before for the purposes of the session. So as I say, how should you categorize your data? It's when you're capturing your content via Harmony, we can also capture and use metadata to classify the content as you're capturing it. And then, as we just saw very briefly, we can use views to actually represent the data in different ways, even within document sets and folders. And we can also take multiple items, both from Outlook, but also from Explorer if you've got some content already on your desktop or on a file share, and get that into SharePoint and classify it all together. So let's take a look at how each of those kind of surface. And in this case, let's focus on a particular case that I'm working on. I've got some emails that relate to that case. So if I go into the relevant document set there, you can see I've got some emails already captured that relate to this particular case of some approvals. And I actually want to go ahead and capture this other email that I've just received, that there's been an incident that needs to be reported. So if I just drag and drop the email that I'm reading, it will upload it into SharePoint. It will capture the metadata automatically, as we've just mentioned. So for example, who the email was sent from and to, the date or time that it was sent, and any of the other kind of relevant metadata around that particular email. It might also be that I've received some documentation by email, maybe a summary or a claim summary or something that I want to put in as well. So in the same way, and let's just switch the view there so I can see documents at the same time, we can see that I can drag and drop documents from my emails and put those into SharePoint, and I can also categorize them with relevant information as well. So let's say that this relates to a particular incident, and I need to update some of the properties and fill in the relevant information accordingly. So let's just assign a particular person to this document. And you can see obviously those properties are visible within the views that I'm displaying there as well. So that's all configured in SharePoint, but visible and usable in Harmony. Likewise, as we mentioned, if I've got some content, maybe some drawings that relate to this claim as well, that I need to capture, I can drag and drop those from Windows Explorer. They may be, as I say, on a file share or on my machine, on my desktop or whatever, and get those in together as well. So very easily, very quickly, I can actually capture emails and documents in a very easy to use manner. So obviously, a lot of that is done with kind of clients, but also capturing, as we saw before, just capturing the documents, capturing the emails is nice and easy. But how do I actually send content to the client as well, and manage and maintain the versions of the documents that I'm working on? So because we're integrated very tightly to my Outlook, it means that, for example, if I now reply to an email or send an email, then I can actually drag and drop documents into the email that I'm sending directly from the sidebar. So, for example, if I want to send this this claim summary to Susan as an attachment, then I can do that nice and easily just by holding down the Alt key while I drag and drop the document. And I can say, okay, this is our draft claim. So I'm going to send that to Susan, and she can obviously work on that. Now, if we say, go down the line a little bit, that Susan's actually replied to that and sent me the form with some of the elements filled in, how do I actually get that back into SharePoint as a new version? Because it's a bit of a challenge because the file name has been changed. So in this case, I sent it out as the claim summary, and I've received it back as a different file name. But actually, I can just drag and drop that on top of the existing document. Just wait for a few seconds. The default is about 3 seconds, I think, and you can change that kind of delay so that you don't do it by mistake. But it needs to be kind of more of a conscious effort. So in this case, what's happening is Harmony is actually checking the document out in SharePoint. It's renaming the document that I've received back to the original file name, and it's checking it back in for me and giving me the option to actually fill in or update any of the metadata there as well. So if I now look at the version history of this document, I can see what changes have been made and when to the document in SharePoint, even though I'm sending documents out and receiving documents in a number of different ways. Not only can I drag and drop emails and attachments, but I can also use contextual menus. So for example, if I right-click on an email, I can say that I want to save it to SharePoint, or I can right-click on the attachments and say save to SharePoint using Harmony. So it's very natural for end users to be sending and receiving emails and documents and capturing those into SharePoint. So everything is actually stored in a nice, easy to use manner. Now, likewise, if I'm actually sending emails and documents internally, which is just as important as the external stuff, I might want to actually utilize the fact that content is in SharePoint rather than sending it as attachments. So being able to actually send documents as links and maybe checking whether people have access to the document and when I'm sending that email is really important as well. I also might want to be notified when one of my colleagues has made a change to a particular document that I'm interested in, or made any changes to the case, for example. So in that scenario, again, if I send a new email, let's say to a different person, maybe an internal colleague, you can see that actually if I drag and drop the document there, it will create a link to the document in SharePoint. And when you receive that link, if you have Harmony, you can just right-click on the link and say open that up in Harmony, and it will take you directly to the document in the relevant location in the interface. So even like when you're receiving links and sending links, Harmony is able to make it as seamless and easy for end users to keep focused on what they actually need to work on. But as I say, I don't necessarily know if the recipient. Let's again send this to Susan, and this is a new claim. So when I hit send, Harmony is able to actually check whether Susan has access to this particular document, and if she doesn't have access, I can grant her view or edit capabilities, and then she'll be able to work on that document. So let's just go ahead and send that to Susan. As I say, I might want to know when Susan's actually made a change to any of these documents in this particular library. in this particular case, for example, or whatever. So Harmony has a favorites mechanism whereby anything I browse to, whether it's, as you can see here, I've got some document sets, some views in libraries, some filtered views or folders, for example, I can add those as favorites. And what that means is I can follow it for activity, so I can be notified whenever that anything is changed in this particular case, but also I can make it available for offline access using OneDrive for Business to synchronize the files, and Harmony will synchronize the metadata. And also we can make it available as an Outlook folder, which we'll see a little bit later on in a few slides. So if I add that as a favorite and I follow it for activity, what that means then is that under what we call the kind of update stream on the People tab, I can see updates from any of those locations that I'm actually following, so that I'll be notified whenever there's new activity. That just means that I'm not having to go and look for content or check and ask people if they've made their changes and things unnecessarily. So one of those items that we just briefly touched on when I'm saving something as a favorite was to be able to make the location available as an Outlook folder. Now, the key benefit there is that I can then use those folders in Outlook rules to help automate the capturing of emails that I'm receiving. So that helps to save time. Obviously, the business user has the logic themselves to say, okay, this relates to case XYZ or customer ABC. And so I can actually have the power to create a rule that anything that meets that rule is going to be automatically captured into SharePoint. So if we look at some of those favorites that I added, some of those I've added as Outlook folders as well. So if we just have a look on the left-hand side of my Outlook, you'll see that there's a Harmony node or folder that's been created under my mailbox with corresponding temporary drop-off folders, if you like, that correspond to the location and the favorite in Harmony. And for example, if I set up a rule now that automatically puts emails in one of these drop-off folders, they'll automatically get uploaded into the relevant library in SharePoint. So if we just have a look at an example of one of those rules, we can see that I've actually created a rule here that whenever I receive any email that has a particular maybe client name or something in the body of the email or the subject, then I want a copy of that to be put into this correspondence folder, and Harmony is going to automatically upload that. So if we actually go to that favorite location, you'll see the results of some of the content that's automatically being captured there. We can see there's a whole bunch of emails. And also I've got the ability to actually organize content in different ways as well, as we saw before with the views. So I've actually created a view in this SharePoint library, which is a kind of conversation type view. So it's actually grouping together all the emails that relate to a particular conversation. And also we can see that these were automatically uploaded by the rule that we actually created previously. So in that case, I've sent an email out and I've received a number of responses from different people, and they've automatically been captured into this library because of the rule that I created and the fact that I've added it as a favorite. So a couple of things that we're just working on at the moment in Harmony is to help users to decide both what content to save into SharePoint and where to save that content. So we're introducing the concept of identifying topics from emails that you're reading in your Outlook and using the power of the Office graph to actually use those topics to bring together information that you've got access to and display it to you in a very logical manner. And that can help you then identify what's already been saved into SharePoint and what hasn't, but also help you easily access the related content in one single interface. So if we take a look at an example of this and say, for example, that I've got an email from a customer here, and there's a whole load of information in the email. But if I just expand our kind of topics interface at the bottom of the sidebar, you can see that Harmony has actually identified key topics out of the email, which might be the name of the account in this instance. So if I select that topic, you'll see Harmony actually displays to me any other content that has been identified with the same topic. Now, that might be emails in my Outlook, in my mailbox. It could be emails that have been stored in SharePoint or in Teams or OneDrive. And it could be documents that have been saved into those locations as well. So, as I say, I've got a single interface to kind of pull together all the different content that relates to this. And also I can see that actually, maybe for this particular customer, there is some other dialogue that I've received that I want to capture into SharePoint as well. So anything that's grayed out here is in my Outlook, but not saved to SharePoint. And what I can then do is actually go ahead and save that content using like the ribbon controls, for example. So if we take that a step further, of where should somebody save that content? So we've identified, okay, that there's a related email that I want to save into SharePoint, but I don't necessarily know where to save it. And that's where we're using those topics again and the Office Graph to actually suggest locations to you as well, based on the topics that have been identified and where those topics have been used elsewhere, and also what other locations you've been working on recently, provided by the graph. So it might be locations that you've been using in Harmony, or it could be locations that you've been using in the web browser, for example. So if we take a look at an example of that, where I've got the email that was brought up, and now I want to save that email, I can just click on the drop-down message, the drop-down control in the ribbon there, and Harmony will suggest different locations to me. We can see the cases that I've been working on, as well as the libraries that have corresponding topics. So in this case, it could be our accounts library because this relates to a particular client, or it could be those cases that we've been working on recently. It's very easy then to save the content, capture the information, and carry on with your work. And with that, we'd just like to ask you one final question.
So would you like to be contacted by a Harmony representative because you're a customer and have questions, you'd like to trial the enterprise version, you just have questions, or no, thank you. And while you're answering that, let's have Richard answer some of the questions you've been asking during the session. So Richard, let's see. When we drag and drop multiple emails, does the metadata for all the emails automatically get captured and saved into the list?
Yes, absolutely. So let's actually do an example of that. So let's switch back to where we were working before, and maybe let's take just go back to one of those cases. So let's capture a few more emails, let's say, actually let's take this one here. So it might be like I've got these emails here that I want to capture all of them into this library. So I can take multiple items, drag and drop them, and it will upload them all together and apply the individual metadata for each of them automatically, but also give me the opportunity to set some common metadata across all of those items that I've selected as well. So in this case, we'll see that, obviously there's those 4 items. They've got different subjects. They were sent from different people. Different people copied and things and at different times. But it might be actually I want to populate another piece of metadata as a common value. I could do that directly from here, nice and easily. And then once I hit save, all of those items are going to get checked in, and we can see that they're all available now in SharePoint with the corresponding metadata captured. Because if we move to our kind of email view there, we'll see all of that has been populated for me.
And can you show in Outlook how somebody can see the email has already been saved to SharePoint?
Yeah, actually, it's something I possibly didn't mention earlier. So you can see actually here that any of these emails have been identified with a category that's been added to them, which I'm actually using then to group my emails in this particular mailbox. So that means that obviously the email has been saved, and I'm shown that. Also, an icon is added to the email to say it's been saved. And the category also shows you the location. And what you can also do is utilize that information, especially navigate to it as well. So if you notice for these saved items that in the ribbon control here, it shows me the saved location, and I can click on it to navigate to it as well. Whereas if I select something that hasn't yet been saved, that will actually be grayed out.
Okay. You were showing topics before. Somebody's asking, is topics only available on a specific version of Harmony because they're using the Enterprise Harmony 6.8 and do not see the topics tab?
So topics is something that we're going to be releasing very shortly. This is a preview version of Harmony 7 that I'm actually showing you today. So it's not in the current GA version 6.8. It will be added to the upcoming versions of Harmony.
Great. Are there differences in functionality when you're using SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint online?
There is a bit of difference. Generally, the general navigation and all the kind of capturing information and metadata and all that kind of stuff functions exactly the same because we're using the same SharePoint web services that have been around since, I think, WSS3, and anything since then. So as I say, you can work across multiple environments. In fact, I've got some on-premise 2010, 2013, 2016 environments here as well. And obviously some of this functionality is specific to Office 365, things like teams and groups and some of the ad hoc sharing and those kind of things. And the topics engine that we're working on as well, because it uses the Office Graph and Azure, it does need to be Office 365 that you would to actually utilize that.
Okay. Is there a mobile app to save your emails from Outlook on your mobile to your SharePoint Online?
So we have a mobile app. Let me just see if I can get my iPad up on the screen for a second while I'm talking. Hold on. So we do have a standalone mobile app to give you rich access to your SharePoint content, which you can display in a number of different ways, like as a grid view or as a kind of a preview pane or whatever. And it gives me access to the content nice and easily within a single interface. Likewise, I can navigate to the same locations that I had on the desktop. These are actually synchronized between this interface and the desktop interface, and allows me to, as I say, work on my content, send documentation as attachments or as links. I can also capture content. I can take photos directly within the application for maybe evidence in a case or something. And also we are looking to extend our Outlook integration to the mobile Outlook version as well, so that you can save emails and attachments directly from the Outlook app on iOS and Android, and that will be coming in the next few months.
Okay, Richard, there are a number of questions, but you're already at 45 minutes, so I'm going to ask, do you want to answer the rest of the questions offline?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so in that case, thank you for your great presentation, Richard. Thank all of you for joining us and for your questions. You will receive an email to view the webinar again with a couple of days. If we haven't answered your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.